Hey, I recently heard a story that I really resonated with, and I wanted to share that story in this video along with the reason that I resonated with the story so much. And so I guess I'll just first share the story. So the story goes, there's a man and a husband and a woman, a husband and a wife, I guess, who are together, and the man comes home from work late. And he comes home from work late, and the woman kind of has her suspicions. She says, "Oh, why did you come home from work late? You didn't tell me." And the man goes, "Well, I just needed to stay a little extra at work and get some work done." And so he kind of explains it away, and the wife goes, "Well, that sounds reasonable, okay." And so for the rest of the week, the husband comes home late because the wife has accepted this as a reasonable reason. The next week, the husband comes home late, but also smells like perfume. And the wife goes, "Well, that's weird. Well, why are you smelling like perfume? Clearly, this is definitely a women's perfume you smell like." And the husband goes, "Well, next to my desk, there's a lady. She's a new hire, and she just wears so much perfume. Oh my goodness, it's annoying." And the woman goes, "Well, that sounds reasonable. I'll let it." In her head, she's like, "I'll let it pass. He's not cheating on me. That sounds reasonable." And so for the next week, the guy comes home late and also smelling like perfume. And then the third week, he has a lipstick on his collar. And the wife at this point is like she's like, "Why is there lipstick on your collar?" And the woman and the husband goes, "Well, my mother came into town and, maybe she gave me a hug and got some on my collar." And the wife goes, "Well, that's actually reasonable." And then the fourth week comes, and the wife shares this story to her friend, and she said, "My husband is coming home late. He smells like women's perfume, and there's even lipstick on his collar." And the wife actually, when she sees this, she goes, "Well, there's reasons for all of these. They all make sense." But the friend goes, she sees it clear as day. She says, "Your husband is cheating. When you take a step back and you look at all the evidence, your husband is cheating." But the wife, who had reasons for each of these steps, justified it to herself that it made sense. And so the reason that this story resonates with me so much is because I've really been diving into the Bible for clarity, to understand what the Bible actually says, what stories about Jesus, and I've kind of encountered the same thing. For a long time, there were a lot of things in the Bible that were, at the time, could be justified. The technical term for this is apologetics. And so the root word of apologetic is to defend. The Greek word, it's to defend. And so an apologetic means to defend the faith. And so apologetics is a study of ways to explain some stuff in the Bible in a way that makes sense so that Christianity still holds up. At the time, before I knew what this meant, I thought it was a little ironic that apologetics sounded a little bit like apologizing, like you had to apologize why this didn't make sense. But I'll give you some examples of things that have become blatantly clear to me, but at the time, they become blatantly clear to me that they don't really make sense now. But at the time, there were just like the wife, there were reasons that some of this stuff made sense. And so I have a sheet here I'll just go through. And one of the first things is slavery. God never says slavery is wrong ever in the Bible. In fact, he specifically says this is how you should do slavery. Leviticus 25:44 says, "From the nations around you, you may buy male and female slaves." And so that's God literally going, it is okay to have slaves. In fact, not only should you just have slaves, you should get them from other countries. God goes on, and I say God, Moses says that God says that you can't buy slaves from your own people, the Israelites, but you can get them from other countries. Not only that, if you keep reading the verse, it says, "You may inherit them to your children as a possession." These slaves are property. And then Exodus 21:20 says, "If a man beats his slave and the slave dies, he must be punished." I'm glad they put that in there. But if the slave doesn't die, there's no punishment because the slave is his property. So basically, this is saying you can beat your slave as much as you want as long as the slave doesn't die. And as a human being who loves other people, it just didn't sit right with me. This really sounded like humans wrote it. And the apologetic I got was that, well, this is God meeting them where they were at. God knew that they just couldn't get rid of slavery, so he at least made some rules about it that you can't kill your slaves. To me, and that made sense to me at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, that God made eating shrimp wrong. He could have made owning other people wrong. And so that just kind of like, that's why this little story about like the wife just accepting things as they come, and then when she steps back, her friend looks at it and goes, whoa, that's really wrong. So there's some other stuff in here. For example, Exodus 20. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and gets the stone tablets. One of them is, thou shalt not murder. 12 chapters later, Moses tells his people, and he tells his people this because he says God is telling Moses this. And so Moses tells his people this: kill your neighbors, your brothers, and your friends. So that's like a direct contradiction. God said you can't kill, and then Moses, 12 chapters later, is telling his people to kill other people. And the apologetic for this as well is that, well, those people were worshiping a golden calf. And that just really doesn't make sense to me either, because then you can justify killing anyone by saying that they are sinning or blaspheming God. It's like, how am I supposed to tell my son, you can't kill people except when they're blaspheming God? Like, I'm not going to tell my son that. The same with slavery. I'm not going to tell him slavery is okay, but we don't do it here in America because of the 13th Amendment. But if the 13th Amendment was here, God would have no problem with you. Like, I'm not going to teach my son that. There's some other stuff here. There's some stuff in Matthew that regards prophecy, which can be justified away as saying, well, Jesus didn't mean this. But if you read it plainly, it really sounds like Jesus thought that he was going to be coming back within 20 years. And Paul thought this too. And you can read it in Paul's writing. Paul constantly is saying, the time is near. In fact, I'll give you a verse where Paul says exactly that. But in Matthew 16:28, some who are standing here will not taste death before the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. I didn't write the full verse down, but basically, Jesus is saying there's people here who will not die until I come back. And it's like, well, okay, well, you can justify that any way you want, but basically, maybe when the Son of Man comes into his kingdom, maybe Jesus meant that he would be resurrected. Maybe he didn't mean the second coming. And the same with Matthew 23:34. This generation shall not pass until all these things are fulfilled. And if you look at like the context of that passage, he's saying this generation shall not pass. Right before that, he's talking about things of the second coming, wars to come, and Jesus coming back. And again, the apologetic stance is that this generation doesn't mean literally this human generation. It means thousands of human generations, which is one generation in God, right? And so, again, you can explain it away, but when you step back and you look at all of these, it's like, wow, what's easier? Does it make more sense that maybe someone wrote this and made it up, or that all of these things need fancy reasonings? Here's another one. Even in the Gospels, you can see there are the apologetic view is that they're not contradictions, that they're just not the complete truth. And I'll give you a little example of this. How many fingers are on my hand? Would it be false to say that my hand has 4 fingers? No, you can say that my hand has 4 fingers, although the total truth is that my hand has 5 fingers, isn't it? And so this is what apologists say about who went to the tomb. If you read each 4 of the Gospels, there are 4 different accounts of who went to the tomb. Matthew says there were 2 different Marys. Mark said there were the same 2 different Marys and Salome. Luke said there were 2 different Marys and Joanna and others. And then John just says Mary Magdalene. Now, each of these people are saying, maybe this person went, or maybe these people went. But the truth is that these people went. And so why the 4 different Gospels, why don't they just say all the same thing and say the total truth that these people went, as opposed to John just saying this person, or Matthew just saying these 2 people? Again, you can apologize this away however you want, but it really is like the husband coming home a little bit late. And then there's also a difference in who these women see at the tomb. Matthew sees the account according to Matthew, the women see an angel. In Mark, they see a young man. In Luke, they see 2 men. In John, they see 2 angels. These are not even 2 of these match, which is crazy because we know that Matthew and Luke copied Mark. So I'm not even sure why they're different. Another very clear contradiction is in Mark 6:8. Jesus says, don't bring anything with you except a staff. And in Matthew 10:9, Jesus says, not even a staff. That's a very clear contradiction. And another thing I wanted to share in here that I've been most Christians don't even follow these. 1 Corinthians 14:34 says, women should remain silent in churches. They should not talk. That's pretty clear. But again, you can apologize this away by saying, well, the context at the time, the women were gossiping, and Paul's saying that they shouldn't be gossiping in the church. Well, there were hundreds of letters that Paul wrote. Why is the one where he says women should remain silent in churches still in the Bible? And is it not relevant today? 1 Corinthians 11:14 says, this is Paul talking, men should have short hair, because if they have long hair, even nature says it's a disgrace to them. I know a lot of men who are Christian that do not follow that. It also says women should have long hair because it's a glory to them. Again, you can explain this away as just the people at the time, or Paul was just speaking to the Corinthians. But again, maybe it's the little smelling like perfume. And another example is 1 Corinthians 7:29. Let's see, Paul is saying, the time is short. I've never met a Christian that actually has a good reason for this. Paul is saying the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should act as if they do not. Pretty clear. Paul thinks that Jesus is going to come back so soon, you should exit your marriage and live for God, basically. Just blows my mind. Anyways, we're at, 11 minutes already. Anyways, I heard that original story about the wife and the husband, and there being justification for how the husband was hiding his infidelity, and the wife admitted each step of the way. However, when presented all of those steps to someone else, it was clear as day that the husband was cheating. And the last thing I want to leave you on this is something that I have yet to find an apologetic for. It's Mark 4:10. Jesus is explaining why he speaks in parables and doesn't just say the plain truth. He even specifically says, I tell the plain truth to my 12 apostles, but not to everyone. And here's why he says that. I speak in parables so that they hear but do not understand. Otherwise, they would repent and be forgiven. That's Mark 4:10 if you want to look that up. Anyways, everything I've shared in this video is kind of the husband coming home late, the smell of perfume, the lipstick on the collar. None of these, each one of these you can justify away with apologetics. But if you look at them all, it seems crazy.